Hey guys, welcome to the Daily Word Bible Study, a plain and simple book by book, chapter by chapter, verse by verse study through the entire Bible. Not only are we starting a new book, but we also are entering into the last section of the Old Testament, known as the writings of the prophets. So this is an extremely important section, and as we go through the last books. Um, of the Old Testament, they are also prophetic utterances, voices, messages, revelation that God has given. Um, and of course, part of the reason why I am embarking on our verse by verse, chapter by chapter, book by book study through the entire Bible is for us to actually look at what the Bible actually says, because especially when it comes to prophecy, there is so much wrong information, um, misinterpretations, wrong applications. Okay, and it's always it is best that we actually read the actual Bible itself. So I'm going to do something different, however, and so I'm going to do probably a little longer introduction because I want to talk about the writings of the writings section itself, the prophetic writings. And then of course, what are the writings of the prophet? Now, I want to go to this here. This is the Old Testament, as you can kind of see. We've actually, believe it or not, those of you that have kind of went through the our simple plain study. Here's Genesis. So we've actually have studied all of these Old Testament books, and we have left off now. Oh, I didn't mean to do that. Uh, okay, let's go back. Here we go. We've actually have we left off here uh, with the Songs of Solomon. I don't know if y'all can see that. Let me see if I can. Okay. Alrighty. All right. So now as we enter into this section, Isaiah, beginning with Isaiah, and as you can see, there are quite a few books. Okay, how many books is it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 books of the writings of the prophets. So I want to kind of get into a little explanation. What exactly is this? And why is this so important? Why are the writings of the prophets so important? Okay. And secondly, I'm going to approach this in an entirely different way. So, as you can see, the list of books here, okay, this is known as the major and minor prophets. Okay, the major and minor prophets. And one of the reasons why it is designated so by scholars, in other words, God did not arrange the Bible this way, nor did He direct it to be uh, um, arranged this way. And it's neither here or there that it is arranged this way. It's just that we need to understand that just because it is arranged this way, doesn't necessarily mean that in itself is inspired. Now, the reason why they are the major prophets, as you can see, beginning with Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations, Ezekiel, and Daniel, those are considered the major prophets. And there's a couple of reasons why. One, length of writings. In other words, especially Ezekiel, Jeremiah, and Isaiah are very lengthy books. And Isaiah itself has 66 chapters. Daniel is a very esteemed prophet by God Himself that that God actually refers to him as an esteemed prophet, a kind of a wise, great man. God himself says that. So that's another reason why they are considered major prophet. Now, if you go back further in the Old Testament, of course, Moses is considered one of the greatest prophets of the Old Testament. David was considered a prophet. So the question becomes, what is a prophet? So then we can even ask the question, who speaks for God? Now, this is important because today there's a lot of foolishness and nonsense in the church. People who call themselves prophets. That's sort of kind of the new fad. I'm a prophet or I'm an apostle. I have yet to see any of those people who call themselves a prophet or an apostle is actually that, other than boasting in a name that they've heaped on themselves. Now, you're going to see why I say that. Because the prophetic voices is so important and so esteemed before God is because, well, let's go back and say, well, what is a prophet? What is prophecy? And then what is a prophet? Well, one, a prophet is one whom God calls, and then anoints, equips to speak his word. So the true prophets of God are those that have been gifted by God to give his word. And these are his word. If a true prophet speaks, then those words are as equal as if God himself or even the Bible is just that authoritative. It is furthermore extremely important then that those who call themselves prophet prove to be so. That it is really a damning thing for you to stand in an office that God did not call you to be in, to give words in the name of the Lord, to say, I'm speaking for God, and he has not called you. That's a damning thing. That's I wouldn't want to be in your shoes if God didn't call you. There's, like I told you before, there's a lot of nonsense with people who heap these titles on themselves, these grandiose titles, apostle and a prophet, when God did not call them or gift them to be so. Okay, woe to them. So the other question now is, how do we know what's a true prophet? Now, prophecy, before I get to that, prophecy is a prophecy is a inspired utterance. Okay, now understand this. Prophecy is a inspired utterance. So the difference between what is a revelation or a dream. Now, a dream or revelation is just that. It is a revelation from God, knowledge from God, right? So knowledge in the form of revelation, knowledge in the form of a dream, right? What makes it prophecy is when it is spoken, when it is uttered. Okay, so prophecy is spoken. Now, oftentimes, of course, obviously, as we get into these writings, there is going to be a lot of predictions, foretelling. Okay, and so mostly this is how we define prophecy. But prophecy also is simply an inspired utterance. Let me kind of show you that. The reason why I say this is important is because, as I said before, there's a lot of nonsense Um, a lot of nonsense that is going on. Let me give you a biblical definition of prophecy. Uh, okay, I'll go with that. Okay, give me trouble here. I know there's got to be a better way. Uh, First Corinthians. All right, all right. Now, this is Paul's teaching on spiritual gifts, and in particularly tongues, interpretation of tongues, and prophecy. So I want to give you this his definition. Paul being an apostle, an inspired writer. I'm going to get to that, why that's important, why what Paul says is important. I say that because you hear a lot of people today. This is a sidebar note. You hear a lot of people today when they're talking about the Bible itself, but then they try to diminish Paul versus Jesus. Well, well, Paul said that. Well, the problem with that is that Jesus himself appeared to Paul, called Paul, anointed Paul. And again, you're going to see why I'm saying that. I'm going to show you a verse in a moment why Paul's utterance, when Paul speaks, he is speaking in the voice of God. He is speaking with the revelation and the message of God. So therefore, his words, when he speaks under that a gifting, is just as if God is speaking. Now, there's a difference between he says, "Thus saith the Lord," and then versus his opinion. Now, when you get to certain things, even in this book, he will say, "I'm speaking, not the Lord." Okay? But when he says the Lord speaking, that means it is a direct revelation from God. Remember, a prophet is a person who is called to speak, a person who is equipped, who is gifted to speak on God's behalf. They speak God's words. Now, look at verse 3, and I'm just going to this is what Paul defines as prophecy. Excuse me. That the person who prophesies speaks to people for edification, encouragement, and consolation. So that's now he goes into contrasting tongues versus prophecy. But I want you to understand when he says this is the simple gift of prophecy, that if a person is speaking prophecy, an inspired utterance, then it is for edification, encouragement, and consolation. Now, I want to go back now because I want to define who is a prophet. Now, this is important as we get into, so you can understand this, that what we are reading, why we can say this is prophecy, and some of this other nonsense that you see in Christendom today is. Now I want to read in first. This is Numbers chapter 12, and it says, "Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because this is Numbers chapter 12. Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because of the Cushite woman whom he had married, for he had married a Cushite woman." Okay, and they didn't like that for some reason. Verse 2. And they said, "Has the Lord indeed spoke only through Moses? Has he not spoken through us also?" And the Lord heard it. Now the man Moses was very weak, and more than all people who were on the face of the earth. And suddenly the Lord said to Moses and to Aaron and to Miriam, "Come out, you three, to the tent of meeting." And the three of them came out. And the Lord came down in the pillar of the cloud and stood at the entrance of the tent and called Aaron and Miriam. And they both came forward. And he said, "Hear my word." Now at this point now, God himself is speaking. And probably an angel through the crowd. Okay? Now I add that because whenever someone, so an angel, a man, God himself, the words are coming from God. Therefore, they are equal. In other words, if God calls, like this angel is speaking to a cloud, and he speaks on the behalf of God, that means then his words is just as binding, just as authoritative. That's why it's dangerous for you to say, I'm a prophet, when you know God hasn't called you to be a prophet. So he says, hear my words, if there is a prophet among you, I, the Lord, make myself known to him in a vision. I speak to him in a dream. He says, not so with my servant Moses, he is faithful in all my house. With him I speak mouth to mouth clearly, and not in riddles, and he beholds the form of the Lord. Now, he goes on to rebuke them. He goes on to rebuke them for coming against Moses. And it wasn't just that they tried to kind of usurp the authority. But God established a precedent, a criteria here, that when he calls just the everyday card-carrying prophet, just the everyday card-carrying prophet, notice what he says happens. I will make myself known to that prophet. I will speak to him in dreams and in revelations. Why? So that prophet himself will know beyond a shadow of a doubt that he is speaking on the behalf of God. No one ever speaks on the behalf of God in that the word of the Lord, when they say the word of the Lord, that happened, that should have happened, that criteria should have been met. One, the prophet himself knows that God is speaking to me. And they will not tell you, as some of these lying prophets are today, well, he speaks in dark vision, blah, 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 blah. No. All right. Why? The most important thing about prophecy is it is the word of the Lord. And when God speaks, it has to come to pass. I'll get to that later. But the idea is that when God chooses to call a person, he is going to then reveal himself to that person. Then that person will know God has called me. Secondly, God then will validate that person. So, for example, Moses, you saw in a sense God validating Moses. In other words, God validated Abraham. God validated David. God validated, we can go through all of the Old Testament prophets. And the people knew God had called them, God had established them as a prophet. God, they already knew that. Samuel, we can go on and on and on. So how does he do that? One, he either will speak from heaven, for example, as he did with Moses. Same thing with Jesus, you remember. This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. And then when Moses went to Egypt, to the elders of Israel, and said, hey, the Lord has sent me here to deliver you. He then demonstrated through signs and wonders, thus God's hand was upon them. So we can go through the entire Bible and see that. The apostles themselves, right, they were validated by the gifts of the Spirit. The gifts of the Spirit. So you didn't have to guess. Like if I lie to you, and it would be a lie, and say, I'm a prophet, I'm speaking the words of the Lord, send me your money. Don't be stupid. And many people are stupid because they are following false prophets. Okay, the fact that a lot of these people, so-called prophets, their prophecies do not come to pass. And there's another thing is that the Bible tells us that all of the prophecies, if it comes from God, must come to pass exactly how God said it was to be. If God was to say something was going to happen at 12 noon and it happened at 12:01, it wasn't God. God's word is exact. Or God would not say, give an exact date in the first place. That's the first thing. So you can count all of the due dates that Jesus supposedly is coming. Okay, his return. That every one of the due dates have failed because these are false prophets who are speaking. And that's important because, again, as we read, you will note, as we go through the writings of the prophet, you will note what God will say in terms of that is exact and what God will say that is not exact. All right, we're going to pick this up more in this introduction to the writings of the prophet in the next study. Don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP, the Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought or comment, add it to the comment section below. Till next time, I'll see you